Hi there, and welcome to this Rethinking the Human Factor Cybersecurity mini-series podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis, brought to you in collaboration with our friends at Proofpoint. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, what's the show all about? Well, the show is all about raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an organisational culture where cybersecurity is truly valued. Now, for those of you who have been listening to the show for quite some time, you'll all be fully aware that we absolutely pride ourselves upon bringing people from outside the cybersecurity industry in to talk to us about their experience as practitioners or academics, or ideally as both, when it comes to human aspects of awareness, behaviour and culture, and how their insights could potentially help bring around changes in people's levels of awareness about anything really, their behaviours, and also national and organisational cultures, how they are formed and influenced. Today, thanks to Proofpoint, we have got a fantastic guest who is absolutely focused upon culture. And they've had like 20 years experience in terms of helping other people with the challenges and opportunities that come from the different cultures and bringing cultures together. He started off in terms of intercultural communication. He moved into helping organizations with raising cultural awareness. And then he sort of really done a lot of work as well with government and the private sector around sort of understanding the clash of cultures when they come together, but then how to untangle that and to help people to actually move forward through a better understanding of their own culture, but also the culture of the people that they're trying to work with and move towards a specific goal and maybe a change. Now, this guest and I completely went off track when we were actually having a conversation. And we really wanted to, at the beginning, talk about culture and how it can be embedded through the use of technology. But to be frank, Pellegrino and I really got into the cultural piece. And so what you're going to be hearing about in this particular interview is, what is culture? How are cultures formed? How are they influenced? We're going to also talk to a certain degree about the relationship between technology and culture, both as an enabler of cultural change, but also a driving force behind changing in values as well. So, what I can promise for you is that it is a cracking conversation around culture. And I think what really makes it a rich episode is how we sort of draw upon Pellegrino's own past, from his family's coming from Italy and moving to the UK, and then moving from the UK over to Norway, and sort of drawing upon that to help illustrate what culture is about and how cultures are formed and influenced. And he also takes quite a bit of time to sort of explain some views around COVID as well. So without any further ado, let's get on with this truly fantastic interview around culture. Hi, Pellegrino. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Hi there. Great to be here. How did I get here, though? I don't know. You just sent me this email out of nowhere. First I thought, who's this weirdo?
Yeah.
And then I thought, this is quite a cool concept. I want to give this a shot, actually. I'm going to give this a shot. Yeah. Well, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Well, we got past the spam filters on your email and we and you're like, oh, this can't be real spam. He's really determined to get in contact with him. So, I think it's one of the challenges that I face is, when we reach out to people are really busy. People like yourself are really, really busy. So actually, when I get a response back, and you did respond quite quickly, it's fantastic. And somebody said to me, how do you get these type of guests to respond to an inquiry? They don't work in cyber, and you're sort of taking a cyber angle. So how do you get them intrigued enough to actually respond to you? And sometimes they agree to come on the show. And I said, well, each email takes quite a lot of preparation.
Yeah, I saw that actually. It was very well formulated.
Yeah.
So that was worth the time.
And I think there's an early lesson there for our listeners, which is that if you're going to choose to engage with people, and you really want a chance of buying into what it is that you're suggesting, time. If you invest the time, you're much more likely, I think people on the other end are much more likely to see that you've taken the time.
Plus, there's the old adage, ask not, get not. If you don't ask, you don't get. Sometimes it's as easy as asking, just ask.
Is there a Norwegian version of that?
There isn't. And I tell Norwegians that, and they go, I like that very much.
Right.
they like that. Ask not, get not. It's been one of my, I don't know if I can call it a mantra, but it's one of my cultural values through life. I'm really good at asking. If you don't ask, you don't get.
Yes.
I work with influencing people, and it's not just culture I work with. I work with people. and the human condition. And it is a little bit manipulative as well. I don't know if you know this, but when you ask someone for help and it's genuinely asking for some kind of help or input, it's very difficult for people to say no. It triggers something in our brain.
Yeah.
That's part of the brain that is programmed to help people in need.
Yep.
Which is part of what makes us human, right?
Yep.
And it's very difficult to say no. And it's not only because I don't want to be unpopular. We're designed like that.
Yeah.
People in need, we often respond positively to them. And your email shouted,
I need.
I need you. There's a difference between I'm in need and I need you. And feeling needed is really cool. That's what makes being a parent quite good sometimes. You're needed by your children, right? So,
yeah. I think there's a few people I've spoken to recently who go, yeah, it's great.
With that pregnant pause.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Anyway, the most unique introduction to any of our episodes today, this has definitely been it. So now I'm going to ask you this one, okay? Yeah. Tell our listeners a little bit about what it is that you do and the journey that you've been on.
Right. Let me say, first of all, that none of my journey or my career, in inverted commas, was planned. I didn't plan any of it. It all happened by chance. But what I always have done, I have a tendency to say yes to irresistible new challenges, which is, again, one of the reasons I'm here. So my parents are both Italian. They left the south of Italy, poor south of Italy, in 1960. They moved to the UK.
Right.
They first went to the cotton mills of the north of England, to a place called Glossop, the textile mills up there. My father couldn't handle the north, so he went south and ended up in Bath.
Okay,
that's why I have this slight West Country twang. I lived in Bath, and then at the age of 30, I moved to Norway after having met a blonde Norwegian woman. And now I've been living here for 25 years. My job today, I work for myself now, but the last 30 years, who I really am, I'm really a teacher. I started as a teacher, mid-80s, became a consultant, which is just a teacher in a suit. Gets paid a bit better. And from there, I ended up being asked one day if I could take a course at a business school because they needed someone to teach their course on intercultural communication. And this is now 23 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I said yes to that. Okay. I said yes to that. I said, okay, I know nothing about this area. And they said, don't worry, we've got the syllabus. We'll get you all genned up. The guy had seen me in action in other scenarios.
Yeah.
And that was it, really. And as soon as I did my first lesson at this business school, I knew that I'd found my calling.
Yeah.
This is it. I said, this is exactly what I want to do. And took it from there, really. And today, I'm a keynote speaker. I run workshops as well, not just in intercultural communication and culture, but how to create environments where people interact productively.
Yeah.
It's all about people. I watch and observe and learn. What is it that drives humans? What is a human being? The past year, I've had this talk that I've been given called We Are Humans, Not Zoomans. What has COVID done to us as human beings? And what does the future look like for us as we come out of the pandemic? So for me, the word culture is basically any group of people working together.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it, basically.
Okay. So our listeners will understand you've got that southern Italy, which is very different to northern Italy straight away. I mean, from a cultural perspective, people go Italy and then go, oh, we have this perception of what Italians are like.
Italy, yeah, right?
Yeah, but actually, it's not that long ago that Italy was really broken down into lots of small states. And then you've got clear differences that are well known in terms of the economic differences between the south and the north. And just within that one country, you were born there. Okay.
I was born in the UK, but that's just by chance. I mean, I was born not long after they moved to England, just happened to be England. But my upbringing was really Italian. I mean, as soon as you entered my house in the UK, you were in Italy. The only thing that was English was the TV.
Okay, right. To be clear, I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time in Malta, and the Italian TV never really did it for me. It's really, I'm now
rubbish even today.
Yeah, it was entertainment. Even the news was entertainment. But anyway, that's another thing. Yeah. But I think just in that country where your parents originated from, you talk about Italy. The perception people have about Italy is one thing. I remember seeing you one of your TED talks. Actually, you talked about people like the name automatically means people will perceive you as being Italian, and there's a perception that comes with that. And we all wear these lenses, how we perceive things, and even like, oh, from Italy, and then you think this way, and you go, but actually, even if you were in Italy, the difference between the north and the south, for example,
enormous. And not just that, people don't know that Italy has 26 different languages, dialects.
Right.
So my parents spoke the dialects from the Naples area.
Okay.
And if you watch the Soprano series, so Tony Soprano comes from a town which is where my father's from, a place called Avellino, which is 40 kilometers from Naples.
Right.
And in one of the episodes, he goes back to the homeland. And when they swear in the Sopranos, with the Italian words, they're not Italian words. They are Neapolitan swear words. All these different languages, right? So I learned speaking the dialect of Naples in my family. Yep. So when I went back to Italy and was in the north of Italy, I couldn't understand them or speak to them because I spoke this weird southern dialect.
It's interesting because I was having a chat with an author who's also a lecturer at the Sorbonne, and he's written a book about the variations in the French language as well, and the numbers is quite high. And then I saw something in France where they were talking about how certain dialects there's a perception associated with those dialects, and it's not always a positive one. There's a bias, so if you're brought up in this part of France, for example, there is a bias towards certain accents. And I know that we've had that in the UK, where the north would look to the south and the south would look to the north, and we sort of perceive each other in different ways. And actually, sometimes those weren't necessarily positive ways. And
the Naples dialect is not positive.
Yeah.
In the sense that if you have a Naples dialect or the Naples language, you're basically related to the mafia.
Right.
Or the Camorra, as it's called.
Yeah. So there's our first exploration of culture, just based upon the French connection. But then France to the UK. And when you go to the UK, you went up to the north of the UK as well, which I know actually quite a few Italians did go north. We sort of think they went to London, and no, they went really quite far.
Well, they went where the work was, and in the 60s, it was labour, it was manual work, it was factories.
Yeah.
And that was the north of England. That's Gloucester, that's Manchester, that's Leeds.
Yeah.
All those places there. But basically, my father couldn't hack it.
The weather?
Again, the weather had a lot to do with it. I mean, it was just rain. It just did his head in, basically, as he said. Yep. And then he ended up in Bath because he basically knew some other Italians who'd ended up in Bath. And there he ended up working at the famous Cadbury's chocolate factory, which was being torn down now.
Yeah.
Between Bristol and Bath.
Right.
And there he worked in a part of the factory where there were lots of other Italians, not only other Italians, but they were Italians from his very own same village back in Italy, because that's what they did. You had the one pioneer who went to the country and then called home and said, come on, guys, the job's waiting for you here.
Yep.
So when we would go back to Italy as a family on holiday, we would see all the same people we saw in the UK, just in Italy, right?
In Italy.
In people.
Getting some sun.
We're getting some sun and some weather and food. But what that did, that childhood to me, I was constantly the interpreter or the middleman between two cultures and two languages.
Yeah.
I was my parents' translator, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I would often go with them to banks, government buildings of some sort, where the English was way too difficult for them to understand. And I would be translating for them as a boy, I was filling my father's tax forms when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
For example, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do them. Of course you can't. I'm 10 years old, I should be playing with Lego and Airfix, if you remember that. And he would say,
Airfix, yeah.
And he would say, what do they teach you at school? And I said, they don't teach us tax return forms. I'm 10 years old,
Yeah.
So I was constantly negotiating these two worlds and being the middle person, the bridge between them. And I think that's where my sensitivity or skill for this started.
Yeah.
The ability to see things from two perspectives, which is what I really do as a cultural expert, if you want to call me that. I'm constantly getting people to see things from other people's perspectives.
Yeah. There's something you also said is, your home was basically Italy.
Yeah.
And I think this is really important, and this can lead us to exiting this part of the interview and moving on. Okay, Bruce is doing his usual. How important are the early years of our lives in shaping our values and how we see things? when you're brought up in the UK, but the home, where the relationships are, where the love is, where you spend your time, where you come back to when things aren't going well. You fall out with some of the kids in the local street. You go home where you're safe. You go to school, you return back home. It's all coming back to home. And where home is a mini Italy and you're there for the moment you're born, how important it's like that first.
It's so important. That's where you're being made, really. I mean, as children, we're being made. A good metaphor for that, when in the old days when you develop photographs, you'd flash the photo, the picture would come up on the negatives. That's what it's like. In a good way, it's like a scratch on a car. You can fix the scratch and shine it up again, but you know that the scratch is underneath. Imprinted in your brain. You never let go. My value system is from that home. I know that. I am very British as well. I even have a British passport. I chose a British passport when I was 18 so that I didn't have to go and do military service in Italy.
Okay.
So I didn't have to pay foreign student fees when I went to university.
Okay.
And I know I've got lots of Britishness in me, but my value system is so Italian.
So when you use the word value system, what does that mean to you? Values and value system, two separate things.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly. And that's the core of what the culture is as well. The definition I use for culture, which is a bit wordy, but it's got it all in there. Basically, culture is a complex pattern of ideas, emotions, and behaviors. So it's the way we think, the way we feel, and what we do. And how do we know how to think, feel, and do? It's because these ideas, emotions, and behaviors are expected, reinforced, and rewarded by the group around you. Those three words are the essence of culture. We do what's expected of us, what's reinforced by our surroundings, for which we are rewarded or sanctioned. So growing up in an Italian family, there were certain expectations, loyalty to family, mother and father are the ultimate authorities, working hard, which is the universal value. But my mother and father really worked hard because they earned so little money as well. But I learned my work ethic from them, without a doubt. Then it's being reinforced through repetition and through watching people around you do the same. And then you're being rewarded for the so-called right behaviors. One of the biggest drivers in people is we're willing to do almost anything to not be excluded from the group.
And I think that's really important. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do anything to not get thrown out of the village. Because in the old days, when you were thrown out of the village, that was basically death. To go back a few thousand years, wandering the hunter-gatherers, if you were excluded from the group, that was basically a death sentence. And that's still in our minds. That really drives us. So we end up doing what the group says we should do. Culture is a very powerful force. So if you can get it right, it's powerful. If you don't get it right, it's chaos.
So when we think about that exclusion, it's expected, it's reinforced, and there's a reward or penalty sanction structure there. So for me, when we think about cybersecurity, this is the accepted behavior within our organization, and we record it and then we share it with people. We put it in a Word document, we put it on training, computer-based training, whatever. We share it with our employees and we say, this is really what we're expecting from you.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you have a system of reinforcing it. So, no, we're still expecting this from you. And then there's almost a case of, and when you don't actually behave in line with our expectations, then there are consequences. Or if you do, hey, here's some form of reward. And sometimes the reward is an actual reward. You feel there's benefit, immediate benefit. But I think often the reward is just knowing that you're part of the group.
It's group approval. It's the nod you get from your mother and father when you do something good at school. And they nod at you with that nod of approval. Well done, son. That's basically it, right? And then when you talk about cybersecurity or any form of culture within an organization, where they often fall short is the reinforcement.
Interesting. Okay.
They make the expectations and then they'll call them guidelines, ethical guidelines, rules and regulations, whatever. And then they'll have certain rewards, approval or sanctions for behavior that's not wanted, but they fall short on the reinforcement. You need to keep reminding at all times.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but it's a bit like having kids again. You know, kids need to be told again and again and again and again and again before they get it.
Yeah.
That's not because they're stupid. It's because that's how we work. We need reinforcement.
Yeah.
And there's always a tipping point when you're building a culture. Once you get enough people to get it, then you get this critical mass that creates this reinforcement through numbers. Does that make sense? Eh?
Yeah.
And then you're on to something.
Yeah. I mean, when I've sort of thought about, in the early days where I kicked off my research, the rethinking human factor research, and I came up with the ABC model. So I called it security, awareness, that results in change of behavior, and scales.
Yeah, there you go.
The point where it's a culture. And it was the tipping point, which is the book as well, which is an interesting point. And even the concept of something going viral. You know, there's always a point where there's enough of momentum behind it, where people are looking around and seeing other people doing that. And I've seen a great video, actually, where there was one person on the side of the hill.
Yeah. Derek Shiva. It's Derek Shiva.
Okay.
Unique the way he says the second person turns a lone nut into a pioneer or a genius or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. It's, and if you look at also the last year, you know, all the COVID stuff, it took a while before we started to really get it and understand the importance of social distancing. You needed a critical mass to sort of say, okay, we accept it. Let's try it out. It seems to work. And then because you're recreating a form of behavior, right? Yeah. And do you remember how difficult it was to not shake people's hands? How difficult it was to wear a mask at the beginning. Now we're slipping a mask on as quickly as we're getting phones out of our pockets. We don't even think about it, right?
Completely, yeah. I mean, that's the thing for us in our household. There are certain things are in a certain place in our house so that we know that when we're leaving, 1, 2, 3, and the third thing is, well, that's the mask. And I also now have the jackets that I wear. I've got a mask in because I know that 1, 2, 3, I'm bound to forget something.
Well, listen, Bruce, I've got masks in all my jackets. I've got a glove compartment in my car. I've got one in my bag. I've got 5 or 6 masks strategically placed where I know I'll need them at the moment when I forget. And that is also a part of reinforcement in a culture. You're making it easy for people to remember. You're facilitating the whole process,
And from a behavioural science perspective, you know, that's one of the things we know. I mean, if you put friction in the way of people between how they behave now and how you want them to behave, too much friction, and they're less effective at actually doing that change. Remove as much of that friction as possible, and actually they're naturally drawn to doing that, especially when they see that other people around them, you know, that this is the cultural acceptable behaviour. Then clearly they see that as well. Okay,
very, very important. I mean, even things like in the summer, I like to go bike riding early in the morning, and it's just not cool getting up at 6 o'clock to go for a bike ride. The first 10 minutes are horrible. But if your clothes are all laid out ready for you to put them on the night before, you're removing tons of friction.
You
Absolutely. Just slip them on, and you go.
I do that with running.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. And you're on your way, and then you're good.
So I'm going to pull us back to, you've used the word values. We've been really lucky. We've had Hofstede come on the show. You're who Gert is. What are values? And the models that you hear people talking about, often based upon the Hofstede work, where you get different nations with different values. Can you just explain to us a little bit about that, so that the listeners that maybe haven't listened, because those episodes are from series 1 and 2, which is 2 years ago. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Values. Often you don't know what your values are until they've actually been challenged. That's one thing.
Okay.
You ask people to describe their culture, and they find it very difficult to describe their culture and their value system until they're either met with some kind of dilemma or it's threatened from the outside. Example. The Football Super League. Nobody really understood what football was about until somebody came with a model that completely challenged it. And the basis, the thing that got everyone, apart from the money and the greed, was this stupid system where nobody gets relegated. That little detail. The Super League meant that no sides were relegated. So we'd end up, once you knew who the winner of the league was, you had no reason to play on because there was no danger of getting relegated. So that takes away all the mystery of football and the possibility of going up or down, and that perhaps Watford might beat Man City in the cup. All that. And if you ask people to describe the essence of what football was and competition,
Yeah.
they wouldn't have been able to do that. But then when it was threatened from outside, it all came out. That's a value system.
Yeah.
It touches your heart. It touches a nerve.
Uh-huh.
You're willing to get really upset about it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what a value is. And it's in the word. It has value for you. It's something that's worth defending because it's precious. But often people don't know what their values are until they're being challenged.
I was introduced to a book by a chief information security officer who checks into the podcast every now and then and actually came onto the show. And he just taken over a role within a really well-known shipping organization. And when he started off, they were based in Denmark. And I was talking to him about my work. And he said, I've got this book you need to read. It's called Fish Can't See.
Yeah, water. I've got it on the shelf.
You got it on your shelf, have you? Yeah. And I remember when I got, fish can't see water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you don't know until you take the fish out of the water. The fish doesn't know it needs the water.
It doesn't need the water, and they just can't see it. I mean, basically the culture surrounds you. You don't recognize it in yourself until something happens that jars it.
And exactly like, again, the COVID, we didn't know what our culture was until it was all taken away from us and challenged. So freedom of movement, the obvious one.
Yeah.
Just being allowed to go somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not until it's threatened. And that's why I always say that when you've got problems in your life or an organization, let's take it back to cybersecurity. It's when you get the problems and the hacking episodes and the raids, that's when you understand how important it is. So problems are a proof that you're alive often. Crises prove to you how alive you were just when you were taking it for granted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I guess the thing is, one of the challenges that our listeners will face is that when they're trying to sort of embed cybersecurity into the everyday culture, but actually gone are the days where when there was a hack, something went wrong, you knew about it. Because actually,
now you don't know, right?
Now you know nothing. Yeah. And so I think that causes part of the challenge because, people just think everything's fine and they don't see the cultural values that they're associating with security until something goes wrong. But the very nature of how cyber attacks are developed and their objectives now is we don't want you to know we're here. We want to sit here nice and quietly in the background and we want to gather as much information for as long as your organization carries on. And we want to benefit from that. So, why would it be in our
Is there no way of knowing that even that they've been there when they've left?
Well, in some cases, the idea should be you should clear up. Just like I tell my children, it's all well and good doing that, but you should clear up afterwards. It's the same for an attacker. If I can get in, get what I want and leave and nobody knows, then you can't take any steps to actually...
Okay, let me try this one with you. Maybe this is a bit too anarchic of me, but I'm trying to get my son, this is going back a few years, to lock his bike away in the garage.
Right.
With kids, they just don't. And you reinforce. In the end, and I would take the bike into the garage for him. Uh-huh. So one, you know where I'm going. One day I just left it outside.
Yeah.
Where was the bike the next morning? Gone. It's gone.
Yeah.
Papa, where's my bike? I don't know. Did you put it in the garage? And he's in tears.
Yeah.
Is that the wrong way? Let them experience the pain.
Yeah.
Because that's often a really good way to break through complacency. It's experiencing the pain, right?
Yeah, there is definitely that argument, but there's also then the question of humans' ability to recollect the pain is only for a certain period of time. So you can almost have the short, sharp shock type of treatment, pain, some sort of, some feedback which tells you.
It depends. Just hearing the words I'm about to say makes me sound like a real
dad.
A dad. Yeah. It depends how hard the pain is. The harder the pain, the longer the... I don't know. No, what I'm trying to say is that, and again, it was only... I keep going back to the COVID crisis, but we experienced a lot of pain the last year, psychological pain. Not being able to be with others, our family, and that kind of pain doesn't go away very fast.
No.
I never forget, back to my childhood, I never forget the pain of being poor. You know what? That never goes away.
Yeah.
My kids don't have that. They're fortunate. They don't grow up in a poor environment, right? And I don't want them to either. But at the same time, you need to experience. And by the way, the number one rule of building resilience Resilience is one of these big keywords, the big in words. Organizational resilience and personal resilience. You can't build that without experiencing discomfort. And part of building a new culture is getting people to understand the alternative. This is the alternative.
Yep.
This is what it's like if we don't do it. It's not a threat.
Yeah.
It's helping them see the other side.
But there is a difference between understanding
and experience.
And feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that with cybersecurity, feeling it could be disastrous. I mean, that could be a company's downfall. That could be terrible. That could be catastrophic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, back to the culture, you're always coming back to the expected, reinforced, and rewarded. That is your basis for building any form of culture.
Yep. And what's expected, when we talk about expected, you're defining effectively these are the expected values. Or is it a case of our values drive our expectations? Or is it
both ways. They should correlate with one another, right? They reinforce one another.
Yeah. From your experience, you've helped organizations get their head around culture. And I think in my recent book, I wrote about culture and how you can have a merger between organizations, which when you look at the financials, it all makes absolute sense. Yeah. And you bring them together. And actually what they didn't do as part of the due diligence is there's going to be a culture clash, which is going to mean that you're not going to achieve what looks good on paper. So from your experience, you've got an organizational culture and then you start talking about a security culture. Can you ever have an organizational culture and then another culture associated with security? Or because sometimes I'm like, you can, do you think?
You can, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of work with international companies who've got offices all over the world. The basic premise is we have a global culture, but we operate on a local level. Yeah. You have to adapt to your local levels.
Glocal, I call that.
Local, right? It's the local culture. And it's the same within a company. You've got different departments who've got slightly different ways of doing things. That's okay. But you mustn't wander too far away from what I call the moral compass. That's what a culture does. It helps you make decisions when you're faced with dilemmas.
Yeah.
We all have the same dilemmas. I've traveled the world for 30 years. People all over the world want the same things. They want a happy life, happy families, health, a job, enough money to eat, and a little bit extra to go and do a few luxurious things now and then, like go to the beach and visit someone, right?
Yeah.
But we all face the same dilemmas, but we've got slightly different ways of solving those dilemmas. It's a question of where you draw the line, and that's what culture helps us do. It helps us understand where to draw the line.
Yeah.
Again, COVID. How did we deal with the first few months? There's a big difference between armed police on city borders in Italy checking people's papers before they leave the city limits.
Yep.
And where I am in Norway, where there were no armed police, we still had the same restrictions of mobility. We didn't need police there to enforce it. We did it ourselves. That trust in your institution and in the state.
Yeah.
But what that really is, and what Mr. Hofstadter would have talked about, that is a demonstration of what he calls uncertainty avoidance. Italy scores really high on uncertainty avoidance. That means that when you have an uncertain future, how many protocols, rules, and regulations do you put in place to minimize the risk of the unknown?
Yeah.
In Italy's case, that's armed guards on city limits.
Yeah.
Norway and Sweden score much less on that. It's a bit freer. That's an uncertain future, but we're not going to do that much to try and minimize the risk. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
That's where it gets interesting with cultures. I don't think it's a problem mentioning, but I did a workshop for Barilla, the pasta makers. Italy.
Okay. Yeah.
It was their Swedish division. So it's Sweden and Italy. How do they work together? Meshing those cultures.
Right.
And there you've got some big clashes on basic value systems, like how much information do we give our employees? How is the decision-making made? Is it a handful of few at the top who then inform the others? Or is it consensus-driven? To what extent do we show vulnerability, shortcomings, and weaknesses?
Yeah.
Sweden and Italy are poles apart on those simple values in life. So when I make a mistake, do I cover it up or do I tell people?
Yeah.
Right? That's where it gets really challenging, bringing cultures together.
And I think that was interesting because when you talk about those examples, you then go, okay, for me and for the people that are listening, it's like, apply that to the world of cyber and what you're trying to do within the cyber. I mean, in many ways, I help people understand. I've developed a range of design principles which are based upon, behavior and culture and awareness, that type of thing. So when you understand things, you go, okay, so if my audience is this, I really need to be thinking within this general context.
Yeah.
That's really going to... That's my design principle for these folks, and for these folks, this is my design principle as well. So you sort of have to become multi-faced in terms of,
you're basically pandering to different needs. But of course, at some point, this is really important when developing an organizational culture, whether it's the way you manage and lead or your cyber security. At some point, however global you are, you have to make a call. This is what we are now.
Yeah.
We've listed everyone. This is what we're going to be as an organization. This is our attitude and our guidelines to cyber security.
Yeah.
Now we're going to follow this. We're going to expect this from you. We're going to reinforce it, and we're going to reward or penalize.
Yeah.
At some point, you make a call, and that's the really difficult part.
So, moving towards the end of our time together here, how do advances in technology shape culture?
Well, on the one hand, it makes it easier to disseminate the knowledge and the information and the expectations, right? It's easily accessible. Technology helps us do that. At the same time, I think, and again, the last year or so has shown us, when we take away a lot of that human contact, it becomes much more difficult to keep that sense of cohesion in a group of people. I mean, when we're sitting at home in offices, and we're talking about these new hybrid offices when we go back,
Yeah.
Some will stay at home and some will go in. We're going to miss some of that, what I call human glue.
Yep.
That glues us together. The so-called human moments when we are together around a coffee machine, around the table where we're having our lunch, the cafe we pop out to have a coffee in.
Yeah.
So technology, if we're not careful, will take away the opportunity to be more cohesive as human beings. That's how I look at technology influencing culture.
But I mean, I'm sure the technology providers that will enable this to happen would argue that it may reshape, so that it might take away what you're talking about in terms of the physical interaction, being in the presence of.
Yeah.
And then what it creates is a new culture in the sense of, as humans, we will learn to adapt. I mean, that's how we've been the evolutionary success that we have been. We've adapted to the environment. Yeah. So COVID and the concept of people working from home in their entirety, or some sort of mixed sort of combination of the two, that we will learn to adapt to that, and that the glue that held us together will be a different type of glue as well.
One thing you have to remember as well is technology has also made it more difficult to trust the information we're receiving. Right? I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I understand how internet filter bubbles work, and the news we're receiving and the ads. But it's getting to the point now where I'm starting to wonder who I can trust anymore from the media with a big M and a big A.
Yeah.
I'm starting to trust my immediate environment around me. That's how it works in organizations too. We need to have people around us to believe the culture we're working in. And too much technology. I'm a fan of technology. I love it. I should have said that at the beginning. I love technology, right?
Yeah.
I love it. I think it's amazing. And I use it all the time. And I'm fairly techie myself. But there is the danger that it does take away a bit of the humanness that we have. The physical environment, just being around each other. I mentioned this to people. I said, one thing we didn't realize when we worked together in companies is that we were smelling each other all the time.
Yeah.
People have different odors. Some nice and some not so nice. but smells are gone. What do you smell now? I smell the coffee from my own machine.
Yeah.
I smell the coffee of my scented candle I put on in my office when I work.
Yeah.
I'm not smelling people anymore. I'm not picking up their micro expressions anymore. I'm losing the opportunities to really bond with people. Even though this is really cool what we're doing now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting, because I think when I started doing my research program into education and awareness, I was tempted to get wrapped up in what everybody else was talking about. And I remember I drew on the wall, I did a drawing of a security person as a matchstick person, because I'm not very good at art. Okay. And I said, what's the challenge we got here? I got this a security person, matchstick person, and then they got to pass a policy to this other person, an employee, who was another matchstick person. And I drew this little square in between them, and as if like the security person was passing this policy to the other person. And he's like, it's about communicating it from A to B, in effect. So they were communicating that document from A to B. And I was like, okay, now I'm looking at this. Okay, so what is it we need to study? And actually, very quickly went in and go, because I was thinking, it's communication. I was like, it's communication. What's communication? That's communication from A to B, from one person to another. And I was like, okay, so I need to actually be thinking about the person. Before I even start thinking about communication, what do I know about the body, the human being? I looked at the body, I went, okay, so I've got the brain, and then I've got the rest of the body, which basically supports the brain to enable the host, the body, to survive. And when I understood that, I started looking into physiology, and then I started to understand, actually, all these good feelings that we talk about, use humor, love, and all these things that we talk about, like even the storytelling narratives are all about stimulating a response in us at a chemical level, okay, which then stimulates the brain in a particular way. And smell is one of those things. Basically, when you smell something, the odor is received in the nose, okay, and you transmit that in the chemical impulses through the nervous system. It hits the brain, and the brain triggers a response from the brain, which associates
Which part
with smell.
of the brain does it hit first? The memory part. That's why smell is the most evocative of all the senses.
Yeah. Which is
it goes straight to the olfactory central part of the brain. It's
right.
Smell. And smells evoke lots of emotions, feelings, cohesiveness. And that's what we're not getting through technology. That's why hybrid is good, because we'll do all the things that we can do efficiently on a digital level.
Yeah.
I won't be doing half as many customer meetings as I did before.
Yeah.
I don't need to park my car in the center of Oslo where I live anymore. I can do it digitally most of the time.
Yeah.
And then the really important ones, I'll be there in person. I'll be more selective.
Yeah.
But on an everyday basis for organizations, if you want to build a cohesive culture, you've got to have people present at some point, and it's got to be coordinated.
Yeah.
If it's haphazard, it won't work either. Some kind of coordination has to happen. So these are some of the challenges we'll be facing over the next few years, because technology has shown us there are lots of things we can do really well digitally. We don't need it anymore physically.
Yeah.
You've got to be a little bit careful about that. And again, this comes from a pro-tech person. I'm not anti-tech at all.
Yeah. You've only got to look back to the course of humanity. Whenever we've had technological advances, it's created a ripple. And whilst that's delivered benefits, which have then led on to the next advance in humanity, there was always a flip side to the coin.
Of course. And the obvious example of that is the motor car.
Yeah.
People don't know that before the motor car or motorized carriage, streets were literally feet deep in horse crap, manure.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact number, but how much manure is being produced in the streets of New York on a daily basis.
Right.
You were just wading in the stuff. Then the motorized carriage came, all the dung disappeared.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. And then we started realizing what the new challenges were. First, it was noise pollution.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, the environmental pollution. Now we're going over to electric cars. It all seems great.
Yeah.
But I'm sure at some stage, not too distant future, we're going to see that isn't quite right either.
Yeah. And I think that is a nice way to sort of sum this all up. When we think of it from a cyber perspective, there are all these risks. There are a lot of benefits from the information economy, from connecting us all up. But with that come risks. And what our listeners are trying to do is to help manage the risks associated with those human levels of awareness and the behavior and the cultural aspects as well. How can we combine awareness, behavior, and culture in a meaningful way to reduce the risks that's associated with these great benefits that we're seeing come through?
And it also tells us that culture is ever evolving. It moves all the time. You've got to stay with it and monitor it as you go along.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
It's a pleasure. That went really fast. Fantastic. It's fun.
It was, wasn't it? Hi there. Well, I hope you found that conversation with Pellegrini really interesting. I mean, one of the things I really liked about Pellegrini when I first actually did some research into him was understanding where he'd come from, the journey that he had been on. And when we reached out and we sort of had conversations with each other, it really became quite apparent to me that he's got a really interesting way of taking a relatively complex subject and actually trying to make it accessible, which is really, really important. You know, he's got 20 years experience of looking at the challenges around culture and helping organizations or hand-holding them through those particular cultural challenges. But the thing that really marks him out for me is that the way he tells a story about his own cultural experience, his own past, you know, from his parents, his family coming from the Italian background, the move to the UK, but almost the house being the mini Italy. It didn't matter where they were in the UK, there was always a mini Italy. And how even when he moved to London himself and then he moved to Norway, which is where he currently lives, there's always been a massive influence. Italy has always been a massive influence upon him, and the values associated with Italy have been a massive influence upon him. So yeah, a brilliant guest, able to get across, I think, really well what culture is about and to draw upon some of the things that we're all experiencing at the moment with COVID-19 and draw upon that and to sort of use that as a context for illustrating the points he was raising. So if you like sort of insights around awareness, behaviour and culture, and you say, well, I actually quite enjoy the format of the podcast, how can you avoid missing the next show or the ones afterwards? Well, the simple way to do that, go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Stitcher and subscribe via those particular platforms. Alternatively, keep a really close eye out on social media. That's like Twitter and LinkedIn. For our collaborators, Proofpoint, go and follow their profiles on LinkedIn and Twitter. They'll be pushing out there, reminding everybody about the new episodes that are coming out. Or come and join me on my personal profile on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And I'll be doing the same, banging the drum, raising awareness and hoping to influence behaviour in terms of our listeners and getting more of you to tune into the show. So, what is the next show about? Well, the next show is all about a fantastic guest from within the cybersecurity industry who has made understanding the human context really core to everything that she's done over the years. She's currently head of an organization's strategy and innovation around education and awareness at Proofpoint, our collaborator on this particular series. And I think what's really interesting is her background in consumer strategy, design, product design has given her really interesting insight on the challenges that you as CISOs, education awareness managers and security professionals face when it comes to the human factor within your organizations. Anyway, we're out next week. I hope you can join us. It'd be great to have you here listening in once again. Many thanks.